Hey, what's up guys? You're watching ThioJoeTech, and in this video I have a full review of the Samsung Galaxy S7, the latest flagship from Samsung. I've got quite a bit to say, so let's take a look. Now first of all, I do want to give a big thank you to AT&T for providing me with this phone to review. So full disclosure, I did not buy this phone myself, but it's not like they're paying me money to do the review. They just gave it to me. So I am allowed to say whatever I want about it. You're going to hear what I do like, what I don't like, and everything in between. So why don't we start off with the obvious, what the phone looks like. The first thing you'll notice is the 5.1-inch Super AMOLED display. It's a 1440p display, and that is about 577 pixels per inch at that size, so it is extremely sharp. It's a great looking display right off the bat. The AMOLED panel means it's going to have really nice vivid colors and great contrast, although it seems like it's extremely oversaturated in general, though there are other screen modes you can select and change that are more color accurate, and we can get into those later. Also on the front, you're going to find the 5 megapixel front-facing camera, which is pretty reasonable resolution for just capturing selfies for that purpose. And also at the top, you're going to find next to it the proximity sensor and the speaker, of course. Then near the bottom, you're going to find the tactile home button, which does double as a fingerprint reader, and the return and recent apps button are capacitive as opposed to the home button. If I had to have a preference, I'd probably say I would prefer that all the buttons were capacitive. That's just what I'm used to, but I guess that was a limitation to include the fingerprint reader, so it's not really a big deal. On the bottom, we have a pretty standard setup. We have a 3.5mm jack, of course, speaker, microphone, and a micro USB port. I probably would have liked to see USB Type-C, but I guess they decided it wasn't widely adopted enough, but they better have it next year, I can tell you that. I think it's inevitable at this point. As for the speaker, it's pretty decent, not really anything to write home about, but no complaints either. On the right-hand side is the power button, which is actually pretty well placed for your thumb. I like that design. It was well thought out. And on the other side, we have the volume buttons. And then at the top, we have the nano SIM card tray, as well as the micro SD card tray. They're both in one. So we do have expandable storage up to about 200 gigabytes, I think, for SD. So you can put all that in there as well. Moving on to the back, things get a little bit more interesting. The first thing you'll notice is the camera. It's a 12 megapixel f1.7 camera, so that's a really nice wide aperture, and the pixel size is 1.4 microns on that sensor. Now, for pixel size, the bigger the pixel size, the more light it's going to be able to let in on any camera, so you're going to have less noise and better performance overall, especially in low light. Comparing that to some other phones, for example, the iPhone 6s only has 1.22 microns, the previous Galaxy S6 was only 1.12 microns, and the LG G5 is only 1.1 microns, but that is because it does have the larger 16 megapixel resolution, which will reduce pixel size. And if you're curious, a full-frame DSLR such as the 5D Mark III by Canon would have a pixel size of about 6.25 microns, so obviously pixel size makes a big difference. The camera also uses so-called dual pixel technology, which is going to give you much faster autofocusing, and I'm going to get more into the camera and that sort of stuff later on in the review. Next to the camera, you can see a flash, and interestingly enough, a heart rate sensor, which can be used with the Samsung Health app, and again, I'll get into that a bit later. Some of the specs you can't see inside include a 3000 milliamp hour battery, which is pretty good. It's acceptable. Would like to see phone manufacturers putting in huge batteries, but it is an improvement over the S6 last year. We've also got 4 gigabytes of RAM. Again, definitely acceptable, good amount, and an increase over last year's model. Although I would like to see in general more smartphone manufacturers putting in way more RAM. I think we can afford it. It's about time. Internal storage is 32 gigabytes, but as I mentioned before, there is an SD card slot for expandable up to 200 gigabytes, so you're gonna have plenty of space. Now for CPU, it's a little bit interesting. There are actually 2 possibilities for which CPU you got, depending on which model. Apparently, the US got the Snapdragon 820 4-core CPU at 2.15 gigahertz, while the international version got Samsung's own Exynos 8898 core CPU at 2.3 gigahertz. Now, of course, these are both very fast CPUs, both top of the line, but some tests have shown that the Exynos CPU is going to outperform the 820 in certain situations. From what I understand, the reason behind these 2 different CPUs is that Samsung designed their Exynos CPU from the ground up specifically to work with GSM and LTE networks, which are found all over the world. However, the US has a lot of CDMA networks and it doesn't play well with that, so for the US version, I guess they went with Qualcomm. Still, it's pretty surprising they would go with two totally different CPUs, and for what it's worth, this phone that I'm reviewing has the Snapdragon 820, so it's just something to keep in mind if you have a choice between the international and US version, just know that. Now finally, before we get into performance, one of the coolest features of this phone is that it is waterproof. Well, water resistant technically. It has an IP68 water resistance rating, which means it can apparently survive 30 minutes underwater of up to 5 feet deep. So that's pretty awesome. If you spill something on it, you don't have to worry. You drop it in the toilet or even in a pool, you don't really have to worry about that. It can take it. All right, so let's get into how this thing performs, starting off with the camera. For a phone, it really does take good pictures. It's nice and sharp, at low ISO at least, and even in the corners, you're gonna have very minimal distortion, which is nice. It also has really good stabilization, I think, so you can get a pretty steady shot, even at very long shutter speeds. But what I really like about this phone, especially, is the camera app. It's gonna give you a lot of control that are really not available in many other phones. Specifically, there's a pro mode that lets you adjust the ISO, shutter speed, white balance, focus, that sort of thing. You can also change autofocus mode between multi-point or center point, and even change the light metering mode between center weighted, matrix, or spot meter. What I like the best is that in the pro mode, you can actually set it to output a RAW file in addition to JPEG, which is a big deal to me if I'm taking a photo that I know I want to do post-processing with to make it look better. RAW files are essential, especially on a camera phone where, it might not have the best image quality right off the bat in JPEG. Now, like any smartphone, it's not really going to do low light at all with the small sensor. It does rely on heavy noise reduction before giving you the final image, but it does do a pretty good job, and most people probably won't even care or notice. As I mentioned before, the S7 has so-called dual pixel technology for autofocus, which means it does have crazy fast autofocus. I'm a huge fan of it. I believe that it's the same type of dual pixel technology that are in some Canon cameras, such as the C100, but I'm not 100% sure on that. All I know is that this does really fast autofocus, takes maybe a fraction of a second, and it's always spot on. Also with the camera, we've got, of course, a lot of video options. We have resolutions all the way from 4K down to 480p if you want potato quality for some reason. And with 1080p, you can actually do 60 FPS, so you have a high frame rate option. And there is a slow motion mode as well. As for bitrate, the 4K seems to be about 48 megabits per second, while 1080p is 17 megabits per second. These are okay bit rates, but I would like to see the option at least to go to a much higher bit rate if we have the storage and want to take really high quality video. There also are some other cool video features, for example, focus tracking. So you click on something and then it does its best job to keep that object in focus no matter what you move around. So that's pretty neat. And then there's also an HDR mode for video and images. I can understand what HDR would be for images, but I don't really know how that works for video. Still nice to have it, I guess. Next, let's talk about battery performance. This is a 3000 milliamp hour battery, which is a pretty good size. I'm not going to complain. If you do want a much bigger battery, you could always go with the S7 Edge or even the S7 Active, which has a whopping 4000 milliamp hour battery. I found the battery life to be pretty good. It's not amazing. It's gonna last you all day with moderate use, although if you're using it heavily all day, especially on cell data, you're probably gonna have to recharge it at least once. That being said, it does support Samsung's adaptive fast charging, so you can at least recharge it really quickly. They claim you can get to 50% in 30 minutes, although keep in mind that as you get closer to full charge, it's gonna charge slower. It also supports Qualcomm Quick Charge 2.0, so if you already have some of those AC adapters, those will work with it as well. And I have found, of course, with the fast charging enabled, it does charge very fast, especially if you have the screen off, everything like that. So if you are running low on battery, it's not really a big deal to plug it in and get a ton of percentages in just a few minutes. Now, in addition to regular fast charging, the S7 has what is called wireless fast charging, which claims to be 40% faster than regular wireless charging. Now, you will need a special wireless fast charging pad from Samsung or perhaps a third party, but I'm really happy if any phone has wireless charging at all, so this fast wireless charging is really just icing on the cake. I'm not aware of any other phones that have a similar type of fast charging, though it's possible more will in the future. Now let's get into probably the most important part, what it's like using the phone, the experience of it. Overall, this is definitely a very snappy phone, and I was surprised that there's really no stuttering at all even in the past, top-of-the-line phones would have a little bit of stuttering here and there. Haven't experienced any of that so far in the time I've been using it. The default interface for the S7 is going to be Samsung's TouchWiz, though I personally prefer stock Android, so the first thing I did was install the Google Now launcher to replace the home screen. Though TouchWiz does have some other cool features that I like outside the home screen. For example, it has an extra volume button for making phone calls, which I love. I'm not aware of any other phones that have that. So if you're talking with someone, I don't know how many times this has happened on customer service, you can barely hear them. It sounds like they're talking through a tin can. You can now press the extra volume button. It amplifies it so you can actually hear them. Now, another cool feature that I found interesting is the heart rate sensor that I mentioned before, which can be used with the S Health app. And you basically just put your finger on it and it measures your BPM. Really cool, useful for exercising. It also even claims to be able to measure your blood oxygen saturation and stress level, though I'm a bit skeptical about how accurate those measurements are just by putting your finger on a sensor, but I guess it's still cool nonetheless. Maybe you can use it as a relative measurement. Now, before I mentioned that the screen looks pretty oversaturated in the colors, and don't get me wrong, it does look nice, but there are options in the settings that allow you to adjust different screen modes that change the contrast and saturation to look how you want. There's not much documentation on what these different screen modes do exactly, even in the official Samsung literature, so I had to do quite a bit of digging to find out, and I did find one website called DisplayMate.com, and they did quite a bit of research on these different screen modes and testing, so I'm going to include some of the results from them and definitely go check them out. The default screen mode is called Adaptive Display Mode, and it does look neat, but it's going to have bad color accuracy, and all the colors, as I mentioned, are really oversaturated. So, for example, the reason you might want to know this is that if you go to post on Instagram or something, and you edit the photo, you get it looking exactly how you want, and then you go to post it, it's going to look pretty bland to everyone else because it's not going to look as saturated as you saw on the screen. The next screen mode is Amoled Cinema. Didn't really find much about this. Apparently it's good for viewing movies and that sort of thing, but still not that accurate. AMOLED Photo is the third option, which is getting better. It actually does use the D65 standard white point, and the color gamut, according to DisplayMate, is approximately Adobe RGB, which is often used in photography. But in most cases for viewing web content, Adobe RGB isn't going to be the best choice, though if you know you're specifically looking at Adobe RGB images, this might be one to consider. Finally is Basic Mode, which is going to probably be the best option for most accurate color. According to DisplayMate's testing, it approximates the sRGB color space, which is standard for basically all web and computer content. Every monitor you use is going to have an sRGB gamut. However, if you're switching over from the adaptive display mode, it's probably going to make everything look washed out and bland, even though it is more accurate. So if you don't really care about color accuracy, just go with the default, and if you do, go with the basic. That being said, I just keep it on the default because it looks nicer, and I just know if I go to post an Instagram photo or something, I just turn it on to basic mode during that time. So overall, the final verdict is I very much do like this phone. It's got some great features, such as being water resistant, IP68. It's got really fast, responsive performance. Haven't had any issues with it stuttering or anything like that. It's got a pretty good battery life. Not amazing, but definitely better than expected, I would say. And it's got a great camera with some nice software features. And I guess that's all really to be expected. This is Samsung's flagship phone. They've got a great track record, and I would like to hear what you guys think, your opinions down in the comment section. You can let us know what you think. If there's anything that you want maybe in even future phones, we can talk about that down there. If you did enjoy this video, I would appreciate it if you gave it a thumbs up so I know you liked it. And if you want to continue watching, I've got some other videos on the right-hand side you might enjoy, like the unboxing of the S7, and you can just click those or look in the description for the same link like if you're on a phone. If you want to subscribe, I make new videos Monday, Wednesday, Friday, so I think it should be worth it. So that's it. Thanks again to AT&T, and thank you guys for watching. I hope to see you next time. Have a good one.